Welcome to another week. Today we have Proposition 17 on the California ballot, which is it will restore the right to vote after completion of prison term. So this is a voting rights restoration for persons on parole cannot vote currently in California until their imprisonment and their parole are completed. California is one of 3 states that require persons convicted of felonies to complete their prison and parole sentences before regaining the right to vote. So right off the bat, we are one of 3, a very small minority of states that have a relatively strict requirement before felons can regain their right to vote. 17 states and the District of Columbia restored voting rights right after their prison term. And so the distinction between the prison term and parole period is often, from my understanding, if you're out, you behaved well in prison, you can apply and a judge might grant you early release and early parole. You're allowed to come back into society, but you have to check in with a parole officer, make sure you don't break any rules or what have you. And so these time periods are, they can range. Like parole can be, maybe you might be on parole for 2 years, for example. So you'd be out in society, you can work, but you in California, you can't vote until you finish parole. So I'm going here. This proposition would restore voting rights to those who have finished their prison term. We would have to amend the state constitution because it is in our state constitution that they can't until they finish their parole. This would make California the 18th state to reinstate voting rights to individuals after just prison term is completed. The fiscal impact is likely in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for counties to register voters and print more ballot materials. So that's interesting. We don't know exactly how many individuals would be affected by this. I would imagine it's a significant amount because we do have a large prison population system. Okay, so increased one-time state costs, also likely in hundreds of thousands to update voter registration cards and systems. Next slide. Voting yes would support this constitutional amendment to allow people on parole with felony convictions to vote. Voting no would oppose this and things would continue as they are currently. Arguments in favor, we have parole is freedom. Individuals that are on parole should be reintegrated into society as they have finished their prison term and should be considered free persons. As free people, they should be given back their right to vote. Parolees are many times they are working, they're paying taxes, raising their family, trying to be good citizens again. And allowing them to vote would be further encouraging them to feel like part of society again. And this is the argument. Number 2, voting while on probation. California allows citizens the right to vote while on probation, but not while they are on parole. Citizens on probation have also committed some crime, but a judge has given them a chance to prove themselves without having to go to jail or prison. Citizens on parole have shown that they can be on good behavior, thus allowing them to leave prison before their term ends. Those on probation have not yet proven that they can be good, but those on parole have. Thus, the argument that those on parole should get their right to vote back, since people that are on probation also have the right to vote. Feel free to interrupt anytime, but if everyone's following, then we are good.
What does the first sentence mean?
If you're on probation, you're still allowed to vote. If you're on parole, you're not. The difference between probation and parole, look at it as a judge. When you come before a judge, for example, they can decide different sentences, community service, or what have you. One of those options is probation, which is a sentence where you don't have to go to jail, but the court and the justice system still monitors your behavior. So they still allow you to vote, apparently.
Okay, so probation is like less severe than parole.
Yes, in a sense. Parole is after you've been in jail for some time. Probation, you don't have to go to jail.
Got it.
Okay. Number 3, re-entry as a rite of passage. Studies have shown that ex-criminals who are given back their right to vote were less likely to commit more crimes and viewed the government as trustworthy and that they were more represented by the government. Many ex-criminals viewed themselves less as such and more as law-abiding citizens once their right to vote were restored. So again, this reinforces the messaging. The government is saying, hey, we trust you to vote. You're part of society again. Don't mess it up. Any questions on these three arguments? Arguments against this proposition. Parole is the sentence. Parole should be considered part of the initial sentence, and this should disqualify them their right to vote. They have not yet fully shown that they are capable of being reinstated into society. They still need to have heavy restrictions. This argument, parole should be considered as part of the initial sentence. This should disqualify them. They have not yet fully shown that they are capable of being reinstated into society, so they should still be restricted in their daily life. So this is saying that they haven't shown that they're trustworthy yet, and we're still watching out for them. We don't yet trust their judgment. They haven't proven themselves good. Next argument against this proposition. Criminals are not citizens. These people are murderers, rapists, domestic violence advocates, and child traffickers. They have surrendered their right by committing these heinous crimes. This argument suggests that once you do something against what society says is okay, you're no longer allowed to be part of that society. You've given up your right to say, hey, what's up, guys? I think we should do this, or what have you. So this is the idea of breaking some type of social contract, if you would. Any questions? Everyone understands these arguments? Next. And that's the two arguments against. Let's look at some rebuttals real quick. So this parole is freedom argument. This rebuttal says that parole places many limiting restrictions on the parolee. Allowing parolees to vote is premature, and that many do indeed go back to a life of crime, and then again would lose their right to vote if this proposition passes, wasting the tax dollars spent to register them and whatnot. So let's open up the discussion here at this point when we're talking about the contention between the arguments. What do people think about this argument? Parole, should it be freedom, or should it be, it's there for a reason, voting shouldn't be part of parole? Do people find that the idea that parole, you should be like a full-fledged member of society, do what everyone else does, is that more convincing than trying to limit these folks that are on parole? Not all at once now.
I just got here.
What's up, Jackie?
What's going on? We already started?
Yeah, so this is the Prop 17. Do you think people that are on parole should be allowed to vote, or should they serve out their parole and show that they're good citizens before they should be given back that right to vote?
Yes, I think they should be allowed to vote.
Why?
Well, I mean, like it or not, they're still part of our society, even though if they're in jail or whatnot, and we pay for their stuff. I think like even convicts, not just convicts, people who are in jail should be allowed to vote. So it gives them a voice of like how, like, what societies that they can live in.
You don't think they surrendered something by doing these bad things? Like, they could have like robbed an old lady or something. You don't think you don't think their judgment might be flawed?
Maybe, but they're doing their time by going to jail already. Like,
So do most people believe that you surrender something when you commit a crime, or do people believe that crimes are committed when you're not in the correct mental state, or there's other influences in your life at that time that make you commit a crime? So the idea is how much blame you put on the individual and how much responsibility, per se, you put on the individual.
Well, I mean, I think you do, like, you give up certain privileges. You know, when you commit a crime and you're convicted and you're thrown in jail, it's like you give up the privilege to like walk around and be free.
And watch porn and whatnot.
Yeah. But like, yeah, I mean, it's like the general trend seems to be like more enfranchisement is a good thing. And yeah, I think it's the most convincing thing is that like most other states or a lot of other states have already passed some sort of measure that allows parolees to vote and everything like that. And it's like the general conversation at the state level seems to be more about whether or not convicts should be allowed to vote. And that seems to be like where things are moving towards. That's like, yeah, I don't know. So this feels to me like a slam dunk personally, but I can definitely like I can see the argument against. Like I can understand that, and I can like it makes an intuitive sense. It makes a certain common sense to it, but it's not necessarily the best for people in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It seems to be like a scale where it doesn't have to be once you commit some crime, we're going to remove literally every single thing you could possibly do and just have you sit there for, 24 hours a day. You're already you're already having a lot of your freedoms removed. And again, that's the conversation of even letting convicts to vote. This one is not as it doesn't go as far as simply if you're released on good behavior, you're on parole, you can get the right to vote. Let's go to the next slide and take a look. So the argument number 2 for the proposition is, well, I forgot what argument number 2 was already. This is about, so this one, like Will said, there's already a bunch of other states that already, there's a lot of other states that already allow the right to vote while they're on parole. And so if that convinces you that we should join the ranks of those folks, then that convinces you. Let's take a look at this. Re-entry as a rite of passage. So this argument says that parolees have much more to prove to society, and this is part of the test that they have to show that they're good enough to have a say in our governments. They have to check in with their parole officer. They have to observe restraining orders, if any. They should spend their time focusing on those things rather than waste time voting. Otherwise, they're going to end up back in prison. Does anybody want to elaborate on this or find it convincing at all? Does it, well.
I mean, is it ever wasted time if you're researching like, oh, how these propositions are going to affect me or society? I don't think that's ever like wasted time.
Sounds like a constructive experience, doesn't it?
Yeah. And through this, you're learning more about other people and their lives. Therefore, I don't know, regaining that kind of humanity that you lost whenever you did what got you convicted for.
Yeah, I agree. Let's, well, you already do this? Let's run through these slides. This one seems to be not too contentious. So parole is the sentence.
Better have been funny.
Yeah. We should try to incorporate these individuals back into society rather than push them away and deeper into lives of crime. Giving them a voice in their communities and larger society would help them get a foothold into being responsible citizens. So this is a rebuttal against the argument that, the sentence is giving up your right to vote. And so, I'm not hearing any crazy controversy here. Does anyone want to say anything, or should we move to the next slide?
I think one question I have is I'd be interested to know what is the percentage of people who are on parole in a state who allows people on parole to vote. Like, what's the percentage of those people who actually vote?
Oh, okay.
Given the chance.
That is an excellent question. I certainly don't have those figures for you right now. I'd also be interested if studies actually showed, whether or not just like if they vote, but if it has any effect on recidivism and people committing crimes. I did like some small research into the general topic, and recidivism in America is like extremely high. It's like maybe like 50+%. So who knows? No one knows exact. Recidivism is when you commit like a crime again after you get released from prison. So, who knows if giving the right to vote back to parolees will put a dent in those numbers, but the idea is that maybe for a small percentage, it'll help them think that they're coming back into society and discourage doing crime again.
Yeah, I also think like another component of this whole thing, whenever you're talking about incarceration rates or anything having to do with incarceration, is that it tends to, there's like a racial component to it. Like there's disproportionately high levels of Black and brown populations that are affected by crime, that are affected by, the judicial system. And so this is just another way of enfranchising voices that historically have not been enfranchised. So that's like a good thing, I'd say.
That's true. I was listening to Ted Cruz on the Senate, part of the interviewing of that Supreme Court justice, and he was saying, as a counter to Williams' point, he says all these blue states, they want to let murderers vote just to win more elections and stuff like that. I don't know if anyone here buys that as a good reason to not expand the voters, potential voters. But I mean, it might convince some people, like, it seems to be a cheap political move just to get more people voting for Democrats.
I think it's kind of ironic that like Ted Cruz is railing against the murderer vote because he's like Zodiac killer.
Yeah. Exposed right here, guys.
I remember that. Man, that guy's weird. Anyways.
Okay, let's go to the next slide real quick. Criminals are not citizens. That is the argument against, and this rebuttal says that inmates are not granted parole for any reason. They are shown to be good, well-behaved. A judge has determined they can be put back into society. The process for parole is not willy-nilly, and these individuals have a true desire to go back to civilization.
Yeah, I've heard like getting back to recidivism, it's like, and this whole idea of like parole not being willy-nilly, it's like a lot of the people who do end up going back to prison who have been on parole, it's for some sort of minor technical thing. They weren't crossing all their I's and dotting all their T's. And yeah, because it's a very sort of Byzantine system. Yeah.
True. All right, and that should be that's all of Prop 17 slides. We're going to have an open discussion here. Does anyone have any questions about what it does? Is anyone on the edge, really? Anyone thinks that some piece of information would swing them one way or the other? James' question says, is this to allow people to vote if they're on parole and after? Yes. Right now, California says you have to finish your prison time and your parole time before you can vote again. What this will do, if people vote yes, will say all you have to do is finish your prison time. If you're on parole, you have the right to vote. How do you feel about that, James? What does your heart tell you? Or anyone else?
Honestly, I don't know. I'd probably be in the middle of yes or no, because I can see like the pros you guys are talking about of letting them vote, but I can see like maybe some cons too. Maybe it's like bad representation, but people that usually are on parole or come out of jail right after have a hard time reassimilating into the workforce again, I should say, or the community, due to such a strange life they've had when they're in the prison. So maybe they're not up to date on anything. They're very narrow viewed in some aspects because of where they've been living and forced to live. So that's why I'm sort of on the fence for this.
Okay, let's pause on that point. Does anyone want to respond to that? So James is saying that they're going to be low information voters, or they don't know what's going on. Maybe they've been in jail for like 30 years. They don't even know what an iPhone is or what have you. And so what I'm hearing from James is that they're just not going to be that well informed, and so maybe they should wait a bit or spend more time in society. They want to respond to that point? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we have the internet, and it's full of information, and I think that anybody who was already in or who had been in prison and they come back out, we basically kind of outcast them to say that, oh, you used to be you did something wrong, or you were a convict, we don't like you. They don't get Medicare, they don't get any financial aid, they don't get anything at all. And when they apply for jobs, they have to say that they used to be a convict or they were in prison before. And I'm not like disagreeing if those are good or bad, but I'm saying that like as a society, we outcast people who went to prison, and for them to like become a better person after they did their time, it's hard for them. And most likely they will like commit a crime again. And you can argue that it's because they have no other choice, or it's just that in their nature or whatever. But in United States, we are more prone. We punish people who commit a crime instead of like rehabilitating them. And I think if they are allowed to vote, they would get a voice, and politicians, those politicians who wants their vote, will have to basically help the prisoners in a way that they want to be helped. It's very much like how we're discussing, like, is this proposition be good for us or bad for us, and we get to decide. Same thing with like prisoners. They get to decide, they get to have a voice of like their future, where their tax money comes from, or whatnot. Because sure, just my 2 cents.
I don't know. I kind of agree with James in that I think parole voters would be low information voters, quote unquote. They probably would be less informed than your average voter. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's necessarily disqualifying. Like, it's not disqualifying for normal citizens. We don't have to take a test in order to go into the ballot box, And I don't know, maybe some people would argue like, oh, there should be certain minimum requirements because a well-functioning democracy depends upon an educated populace and all of that, right? But we don't have any requirements for education when it comes to whether or not you're allowed to vote. Like, you don't have to be informed. You could just literally put on a blindfold and just bubble in whatever you want to bubble in. Like, it's your right. So it's a matter of human rights, I believe. So it's not necessarily about the quality of the voter. It's just about whether or not they're a human being. And that's the end all be all.
So James, were there other points that had you in the middle besides that topic of educated voter or not?
Oh, can we go back? Do you send the slides to us? Because I missed like the first 3 parts or something. So
I'll copy it in again. Bam. Yeah, I'll add my 2 cents on that point. Again, it's I would concede that the brand new people out of prison are they don't know what's going on, but that's not enough to disqualify them, and they might even probably be more informed than regular people out here who who just don't read all that stuff. So yeah, does anyone have any other comments? This one.
I think I saw Henry unmute himself. Henry, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say what William said about how like the average voter that wasn't incarcerated may not be as informed, just like people on parole, right? Yeah.
And also, I think, isn't there also a prop where we're trying to lower the voting age?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's
So
two.
I think if we're even thinking about letting even younger people vote, why not? Well, what's the difference between them and these people who have been outcasted by society, right? This would just serve as more motivation for them to think about where society is heading and how that would affect them.
Yeah.
I like Jackie's point about like if you give people on parole the ability to vote, then politicians have to think about them a little bit more, because I do think that, you know, people who don't have the ability to vote, those politicians probably won't won't focus on them too much. So yeah. And also the fact that they already went to jail and did the jail time. So yeah.
Excuse me. Something interesting about this topic is, yeah, like Wesley brought up, there's two other propositions on the ballots that are expanding voting rights. And so if you are, you know, aligned in your principles on these three, you just really want to expand the electorate because you believe everyone should have a voice, whether they're a little younger or whether they're in some other circumstance of their life. You would probably vote the same way in all three of them. And what's interesting to think about is maybe this one is different because you have something you really concerns you about people that are convicted felons, you know, whether they're murderers or rapists. And so in that case, your principle, your value here about whether people surrender certain rights or what have you, it trumps your ideas about whether the electorate should be expanded. So something to think about. At this point, we are going to move on to the next proposition.